And this session is being recorded. Okay, so good morning to everyone. Welcome to the Accessibility in Action workshop. Thank you for sharing your name and your role in the chat feature. Mr. Evans and participants, let's get started with today's workshop. I am Dolores Ali, the Executive Director of the Student Success Center. Be sure to add your name and college as you're entering, and I will go ahead and mute everyone so that we can minimize distraction here. Let's see. Okay, thank you. Okay. This workshop will be recorded, and the recording may be accessible through the Student Success Center's YouTube channel. And I will put that link in the chat feature so that you can access that, at least have the link to the channel and be able to access the recording once it's posted. During Mr. Evans' presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please also use the chat feature to add your questions or comments. At this time, I will go ahead and introduce Mr. Evans, who is the Director of the Virtual Learning Community, Professional Development Center, and Accessibility Technologist at Wake Tech Community College. He has a master's in Instructional Technology and Design and is a former middle school teacher and technology facilitator. He has presented across the state and nationally on accessibility, course design, and online teaching. Darren works with faculty and staff across curriculum at all 58 community colleges on creating and delivering effective, accessible content. During today's session, Darren will introduce digital accessibility and the benefits of creating accessible digital content, along with examples of the way the content can be beneficiary to all users. So Mr. Evans, thank you so much. And I'll go ahead and turn over to you.
Oh, thank you. So today we're going to talk about creating accessible Word documents, and we'll go over some of the tools and techniques. We also have an accessibility handbook that you can get from the VLC, and I'll talk about that. So if you miss something, you don't need to take notes. We'll work through it. If you have questions, please at any time just type them in the chat, and we'll try to get those as quickly as possible. So the first thing when we talk about Word accessibility, I really want to talk about is, and a word I'm going to use quite a bit today is structure. And the structure that you can create from creating accessible Word documents is going to benefit you as a user just as much as it would somebody with a disability. And one of the things I do, I teach a Word class not at Wake Tech, but at another college. And what I do when we first start talking about Word is I don't mention the word accessibility. If they bring it up, I pretend like I don't know what they're talking about. Because what I want my students to see is the relationship between really learning Word and accessibility. If you learn Word really well, a side effect of that is you're going to create accessible documents. And the reason you're going to do that is because it's easier. You know the software a little bit better. So I hope we can demonstrate that as we're here today. So today's objective, by the end of the day, I want you to understand what accessible text means in a document. Again, we're going to talk about document structure with headings and lists. We're going to talk about accessible images, tables, hyperlinks. And we're not going to really talk about repeated blank characters, because if you're using Office 365, that's no longer quite the problem that it was, but we'll touch on it. So the advantages of an accessible document, it just means that your content is visible to as many students as possible. And you're going to use Word's sort of built-in tools and features. And like I said, a side effect of really learning Word accessibility is that you learn the software a lot better. You become more efficient at creating documents, just general documents, without even necessarily thinking about accessibility so much. So the first thing we're going to talk about is very simple. We're just going to talk about accessible font styles. And by that, we mean just fonts that are easy to read. Now, when I say accessibility, I mean everybody, okay? I'm talking about everybody who looks at my content. So that's people who don't have visual impairments, people that do. It's people who don't have hearing impairments, and people that do. I want to create documents one time that anybody can read. I'm like you, I have limited time. I don't have time to create special documents for people, you know, 3 different versions of the same document. So I do it one time. I do it with accessibility in mind, and then I don't have to go back and remediate. It's sort of like designing a building. If you design it with stairs in the first place, it's a lot easier to do it that way than go back and then try to add them later. So for accessible font styles, this is very easy. We just mean things that are easy to read. So they're not cursive or handwritten fonts. They're not overly decorative, and they're just easy to read. They look like fonts that you would see on an old school typewriter. So you want to make sure you have accessible fonts. Also, you want to have accessible font colors. So you don't want to have colors that are difficult for people to see, difficult for them to understand, that are difficult for them to even see what the letters are. So you don't want to use those. You want to have good color contrast. You want to have those colors that are just easy for people to see. You want your content to be as easy as possible to interact with. And a note about the color contrast. So in the before times, I would travel to a lot of the colleges, and one of my first stops, I would always go to the disabled student services, and I'd always ask one question. I'd say, how many people do you have here with the declared disability of color blindness? And it was always 0 in the places that I went. It was always 0, which was interesting to me because surely they have somebody on their campus who's colorblind. But the point is that most people who are colorblind, they never officially declare that as a disability, right? And it's sort of a common one. So when we do color contrast, we're really helping everybody. And I just wanted to bring that up so you can understand when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about everybody. So as I said, we don't want to use color alone to convey information. We want to have good color contrast, and we want to have just easy to read fonts. Now, this is a graph I really worked on with someone, and well, she was an instructor of geography, and she said, "I know you don't like us to use color, but I want to use color." I said, "I don't care if you use color." And I told her, I said, "I wish my biggest problem was whether you use color or not." But a lot of times when I'm having accessibility conversations with people, that's not really what we're talking about. I would argue that this image here is easier for everybody to read, that it's better pedagogy than this one. So this is just a comparison of hours worked per worker. It's a comparison table from 2013. I would argue that everybody knows what pluses and minuses are. So I would argue that just the pedagogy of this is better. It happens to be an accessibility thing, but really it's pedagogy. Most people know at this point, this is a college class, they know that plus means more, minus means less. So a lot of times when I'm having this, accessibility discussions with people, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about pedagogy, we're talking about structure. And she eventually came to see that, well, yeah, this is just a little easier to read because it's not using the color to convey the information. It's using common symbols that my students know, which is pluses and minuses. So if you want to use color, that's fine. I'm not the color police. Like I said, I wish that was my biggest problem, whether people use color or not. But don't use color alone to convey information. And as you can see in this example, it's just better pedagogy, it's just better teaching. It's easier to understand the graph on the right than it is the graph on the left. And that's for everybody. So that's one of those ways that accessibility ends up benefiting everyone, just better teaching sometimes. So if you want to emphasize text with color, again, I don't care if you do that. I generally don't, but if you want to use color, that's fine with me. Just don't use color alone. Use some sort of or some other formatting, whether it's italics, bold, um, that kind of thing. So this is our first recap. So all we talked about so far is just, this is something that'll be easy for you to do, is just use standard font style. So you don't want to use cursive or overly decorative fonts. You want to have good color contrast that's easy to see and understand. And if you want to convey information uh, with color, use something else besides color. Don't use color alone to convey information. And again, a lot of times, if you use something besides color, it's just better pedagogy. So now that was just a sort of introduction to fonts and just visually what it looks like. Now, a sort of a trick question is, a person that's using a screen reader, say a person that's totally blind, they really don't care what fonts you use, right? Their screen reader's going to read it. They don't care if you use, Verdana or Times New Roman and honestly, they really don't care if you have good color contrast, because the screen reader is going to read what's on that screen. Microsoft Office, Word, so that's Word, Excel, PowerPoint, they're built with accessibility in mind. So if you learn to use the tools in Microsoft Word and you learn the software well, you're going to create accessible documents. And it's going to become second nature to you, just because, as I said, it's just a lot easier. It's quicker and easier, and it lets you sort of automate how you create documents. So now we're going to talk about building document structure. We're going to talk about heading styles. We're going to talk about applying headings to a document. We'll talk about modifying headings. We'll talk about creating lists, ordered lists. And then we'll look at how you would, maybe remediate a document with structure. So this is going to be all about structure. And in fact, when I teach my class, I say, okay, we're going to talk about structure. And then later on in the class, I think I do this around week 2 or 3. It varies sometimes. And then when we talk about accessibility, I sort of loop that back in. I tie it back into what we were talking about. I show them how someone with a disability would use the structure that they benefit from. And that structure and accessibility are sort of the same thing, or two sides of the same coin. So the first thing we want to talk about is headings. Now, we don't have time today. I've just been approved to travel again, which is great. So I could be more than happy. I'd come to your college. We could sit in the computer lab. We could do this hands-on, and we could do, just work through Word. But one thing I'd recommend that you do in your free time, if you have time, is learn about this styles group here in Word. We don't have time today to really dig into it, but what it can do for you is it can almost automate your document production. So it can make creating documents for you a lot quicker, a lot easier. So by adding a heading 1, that's adding structure to my document. I'm sort of creating a digital outline. Now, a lot of times we use bold as a heading, right? We'll just put something down and we'll bold it, but that's not a proper heading. I have to use that styles group and that heading 1. And you have 6 levels of headings in Microsoft Word. And people ask sometimes, when would I do a heading 1 or a heading 2? And I always say, I don't know, because I don't know what you're trying to categorize. I generally do one heading 1 per document. You don't have to do it. This is just the way I do it. I do one heading 1 per document, and that's sort of like the title of my book. And then heading 2s are like chapters. So I can have as many heading 2s as I want. I generally try to keep heading 1 to 1 per document. Sometimes I might break that rule a bit depending on what I'm categorizing. So headings are an accessibility feature, but A little bit later, I'll show you how they benefit you as a cited user. So to check your headings, you can go to View and Navigation pane. And the navigation pane will open up all your headings. So, and I'm going to tell you about the three parts of the navigation pane and kind of what you can do with it. But what's good about the navigation pane is it lets you easily navigate through a document using your headings. So if I use bold as a heading, it's not really a heading. It won't show up in that navigation pane, and I can't navigate through my document in the same way. So we'll talk about the three sections of the navigation pane. The first one is just the headings, right? What it looks like, what the structure is of your document. The next part of the navigation pane is pages, and this just gives you sort of a brief thumbnail of what each page, of what is on each page. Now, I use pages quite a bit. Now, some of you probably will never use this feature of the navigation pane, and that's fine. I use it for, when I have long documents, particularly documents that have a lot of screenshots or images in them. I use pages just to look at it, just to see how it's going to print, how they're going to line up, how they look, how are some of the images too big? Do I need to standardize the image size? So I use it for that reason. As I said, most of you probably maybe won't use that pages function, but I do all the time. But I did want to show it to you. And then you have results. So you can type in a word and it'll, it'll highlight every place you see that word in your document. And I'll show you a little use for that a little bit later. That's something that you can do if you need to replace something, or maybe you just use a word too many times. Maybe you want to vary how you, create your document. As you can see here in this document, the word team is there's 119 instances of the word team. And in this document, it had to be that way because it's a draft for proposal, and it talks all about teams. So those are the three sections of that navigation pane when you create those headings. And then again, you're going to View and you're going to go to Navigation pane, and it'll show you if you've created headings, if your document has structure. Now, the good thing about creating these headings, and remember, we've been talking a lot about automating the process of creating Word documents, making it quicker and easier for you as a content producer. So one of the great things about using headings and creating that structure is that it can automatically create a table of contents for you. So you can just go to references. So once this document was created, this draft of e-learning department proposals, everything was put into headings. The reason we put it, I'm going to show you a little bit later why, a couple of reasons we used headings here. And what's going to be interesting, or may not be interesting to you, is that the reason we used headings in this document had nothing to do with accessibility at all. That was a side effect of another aim we were trying to achieve with it. And one of those aims we were trying to achieve was we wanted to make this document, we knew we were going to have to edit it, right? It's a draft. So we wanted to make it easy to navigate, easy to get through, and just have, we wouldn't have to do endless scrolling, looking at everything. We wouldn't have to, hunt and peck for things. We wanted to make it easy to navigate, particularly when we had to edit stuff, right? If we had to edit a part about student preparedness, we just wanted to be able to just click on that heading and it would take us right to that section of the document, thus making it a little bit easier for us. So once we had the headings, we just went to references and table of contents. And then we have a couple of choices about how we wanted to create our table of contents. We clicked it and it automatically creates a table of contents for you with page numbers and everything. Now, what's good about creating a table of contents that way is that if you go back into the document and you edit it, say you add 10 more pages to a section, Word will automatically update those numbers for you. You never have to think about it again. So again, someone who's using a screen reader will navigate through the headings with their screen reader, and you're going to be able to do the same navigation. And we'll show that just a little bit later. So that's another benefit of creating those headings, creating that structure, is that it allows you to create that table of contents that will automatically update, so you don't ever have to do anything else to it. So we're going to talk a little bit more again about that styles group, that styles pane, and what you can do with it. And one of the things you can do is just create a list using the list style. But again, what's good about it is it lets you automate your document production process. So we'll talk about styles in another minute here. So I can create all kinds of lists here, and I just simply go to the styles pane. I create the type of list I want to. If I want a bulleted list, I mean, it does it automatically for you, and you can sort of set a template for that as well. So that's, very easy to do. And again, when you have time, go through that styles pane and just look at it. Just look at some of the functions, look at some of the things you can do, and just think about automating your process, as we call it. And I can also go to this paragraphs group here, and it gives me a few options to create lists. So if you use the built-in features of Word, side effect of using the built-in features of really learning the software is you're going to end up creating accessible documents. It's just a side effect. Now, the paragraphs group up here, that lets me create spacing. And this is when we talk about repeated blank characters or repeated white space. The reason that's a problem is if I'm using a screen reader and I hear blank, 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 I think the document is over, right? That's the end of the document. But what this paragraphs group does is it allows you to create spacing, tab stops, that kind of thing. So if you use that again, you can make that sort of automatic for you, so you don't really have to think about it. So we use that paragraphs group to create, our line spacing, whether we want multiple lines, whether we want it to be double spaced or single spaced. So I guess you're sensing a theme, or you should be sensing a theme here, is use the built-in features of Word. So if you use this styles group, this paragraphs group, you're going to end up with something accessible 9 times out of 10, just by using the built-in features and really understanding what they are and what they mean. So now we're going to talk about hyperlinks, and one of the things, and again, we're going to talk a little bit more about pedagogy than accessibility. So this is going to be kind of a double conversation, I guess, or a multifaceted conversation, I'll say. It's like sometimes when my wife's talking to me about emptying the trash, we're not really talking about emptying the trash, right? We're talking about something else. And it's just like, in this, we're talking about accessibility and pedagogy. So for a hyperlink, don't do click here, click here, click here, simply because that's not good information. I think this one down, so I could say, click here at the bottom where you see this example, but this Wake Tex Flavors Restaurant opens in a new window, or just new window. That's an easier to understand hyperlink. It just is. It's better pedagogy. It lets the student know where they're going, what they're expected to see, and what's going to happen. Now, you would never say new window for an email. simply because you know that if I click on an email, I'm sending an email, it's going to open up an email program, and you know that's going to be a new window. So that's sort of an understood one. So for an accessible hyperlink, you just want to really, you're really asking, where's the link going? What am I going to see? And what happens when I click that? And to create a hyperlink, so let's say that I'm doing this document for whatever reason. I type out what I want the hyperlink to be. I want that hyperlink to be meaningful. I want it to mean something. I don't want it to say just click here, click here. Click here for what? What does that mean? So I write out what I want that hyperlink to be. And for this one, I said to find some of America's best tacos, go to taco trip, new window. So I highlight it, I right click, and I go to hyperlink. Then after that, what I'm going to do is, that's the text I want displayed. And then I can paste in my address if I have it. I can just copy it and paste it. And that's how I create a hyperlink. Now I'm going to talk to you for just a second about this thing up here that says screen tip. Now, most of you will probably never use screen tip, but I do want you to see it in case maybe one day there might be an eventuality where you do. Some of you will never have a visually impaired student or a student that's hearing impaired. But if you do, this screen tip is a cool thing that can help. So what the screen tip does, when you click on screen tip, you can type anything you want in there. It just so happens that in this class, I did have someone who was visually impaired, and she used two different screen readers. She used JAWS and NVDA. So for this one, I just type NVDA works best with this site. So in other words, I was giving her a sort of a private message. And when you sort of hover over it, that screen tip will pop up. Most of your sighted students will never see that screen tip because they won't hover over it. But when she clicks on it, she'll get that screen tip. As soon as she gets there, she'll get that screen tip. And then it's just a way to help her with just a minor sort of logistical detail. So those are hyperlinks and headings. If there's any questions, or I go too fast, or I skip over a point, or you want me to clarify, just type in the chat and we'll answer your question. So the next thing I want to talk about is alternative text. Now I could talk to you for hours about alternative text, but I'm not quite going to bore you to talk about it that much. But one thing I want you to understand with alternative text is it's letting someone know that there's an image there. It's putting images in context. It's giving images descriptions. And we'll talk about image descriptions, and we'll talk a little bit again, a lot of times when I'm talking to people, around the state about accessibility, we're talking about pedagogy. We're talking about structure. We're talking about making things easier for everyone, not just people with disabilities. So alternative text just provides an alternative to the image for someone who can't see it. It's one of the easiest accessibility principles to learn, and it's one of the hardest to master. I mean, I would in no way say I've mastered alt text and image descriptions, because I haven't. So to add alt text, I just, I click on that picture, and I can go to format picture. Now in 365, it says add alt text or edit alt text, but same principle. And then for this one, I just typed in Baja fish tacos. And the reason I did is because I give an image description here, right? I talk all about what's in this image right under it. So I know that, Amanda's screen reader is going to read what's on this image, and then it's Baja Fish Tacos, because it explains, these paragraphs explain why this image is there and what's going on. So I don't have to be very descriptive in my alt text. So when do you use image descriptions? How do you use alt text? It depends on the context. That's where the art and science of it come in a little bit. So I'm going to make an argument here, and I'm open to being persuaded on this. I've made this argument for gosh, 7 or 8 years, and I'm open to be persuaded on this argument. So far, nobody's really offered much of a rebuttal, but if you do, I'm going to listen to it. I would argue that in higher education, we really only use 3 types of images. They're decoration. So they're placing the content for decoration. They're examples. They serve as an example of a concept, and then there's content. Now, I have to explain content. So one lady at one college, I won't name it, she's in one of my trainings, and she said, well, I disagree with this. I said, okay. I said, I'm open to being persuaded. Tell me why. She said, I work in financial aid, and I never, ever create content or decorative images or even really example images. So I pulled up the site, and she had an image of how to apply for a FAFSA form. I said, ma'am, that's content. We could argue that's the most important content at this college in a way. So when I say content, I don't mean that it has to be necessarily academic content. But so she didn't convince me, but again, I'm willing to be convinced on this, but I just argue we have decorative images, we have images that are examples, and then we have content. And by content, I mean that in an expansive way, okay? Content doesn't just mean your math class or your geography class. There's a lot of things that can and are content, can be and are. So decorative images are just that, they're decorations, right? They have no purpose other than to break it up visually for a sighted user. And in fact, if you took the image away altogether, it wouldn't make any difference to what you were trying to convey. So that's why they're called decorative images. So here's a decorative image, right? Mongolia is a country in Asia that is sandwiched between China and Russia. And then I have the Mongolian flag. That has no bearing on what I'm trying to get across here. What I'm trying to get across in this slide is that Mongolia is a country in Asia that is sandwiched between China and Russia. That's really all I'm saying. That flag is there for decoration and for no other reason. So here's an example image, right? It says, to remember the life and accomplishments of Benjamin Franklin. He's commemorated in a number of ways. Because this is now an example, we'll just type an overview of what we see there, right? All we're really saying is, hey, to remember the life and accomplishments of Benjamin Franklin, he's commemorated in a number of ways. So the alt text is just going to read, a marble statue of a seated Benjamin Franklin located outside of the National Memorial. Because it's just an example. So for an example, you're just going to do a brief overview of what's in that image. And that's one way you can do it. It's an example of how we commemorate the life of Benjamin Franklin. Now, some images, they're neither decoration or examples, they're actual content. And for these images, we need a long description. So that long description is something that says, hey, there's an image here, and here's why this image is here. Now, again, this is pedagogy. This isn't just for people who can't see the image, right? This is for everybody. It's pedagogy. It's saying, we've got an image right here, and here's the reason this image is here. I'm just explaining why this image is here, what's in this image. So think back to the image of the Mongolian flag in slide 32, okay? That flag and that, and that sort of, decorative image was just there to break up the monotony of that slide. That's the only reason it was there. Now, I want you to understand that image descriptions and alt text are they're all context dependent, right? Why is the image there? What's the context of that image? It's like if I was showing you, say I was doing a presentation on, let's say, women's blue jeans, women's jeans. And I just want to show you an example of women's jeans you could buy at Target. The, the context of that is just, hey, you can buy these women's jeans at Target. So the alt text might be just blue women's jeans available at Target. But let's say I want you to buy those women's jeans. Then I'm gonna, and you're a woman, I'm gonna have to talk about size, I'm gonna have to talk about cut, color. So it's the same image, right? But that long description and that alt text are gonna be different depending on those very, very different contexts. The first context is just, hey, this is Target, we sell women's jeans. That second context is, this is Target, we sell women's jeans. We want to sell them to you. So it's going to be context dependent. So that first flag of Mongolia was simply a decorative image. That was all. It wouldn't change anything if the image was not there. So now we're going to see that same image, but in a slightly different context. So here's the long description. In this slide, what I'm really trying to convey to my students is, I want to explain what those symbols on the flag of Mongolia mean, why they're there. We have what? On our flag here in America, we have 13 vertical rows, 13 colonies, 50 stars, 50 states. Again, flags mean something. So this long description is for everybody. Everybody sort of understands what's in that, what that flag means. So in this one, I explain what the flag means. The flag of Mongolia consists of 3 vertical stripes of red, blue, and red. The soyombo is a common arrangement of abstract geometric patterns representing fire, sun, moon, earth, and water. The yin yang symbols under the soyombo on the first vertical red stripe. So I have I just explained what that flag looks like, what that soyombo is, what it means, what it represents. Since I have that long description, the alt text would simply read flag of Mongolia or Mongolian flag, because that's all that would be necessary in that context, right? That's all that would be necessary because I've done that long description for everyone. I know Amanda's screen reader will read it. The sighted students will look at the image, read the description, look at the image, and it'll help them make that sort of mental connection as well. So that's kind of the thing we're trying to do. And again, where the art and science of image description comes from is you have to think about the context of your image. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people about images, and I talk about those 3 types of images that I believe are the only ones we really use in higher education, we end up talking a lot more about pedagogy than they intend, or even I intend sometimes, because what I'm trying to do is get them to think about, why is this image here? Okay, let's not even talk about accessibility for a second. Why do you have this image in this slideshow? What are you really trying to convey here to your students? And when they think about it that way, they think about those long descriptions. It makes those long descriptions and those alt texts, it makes it a little bit easier when they really think about, why is it here? If it's here for decoration or to break up the monotony, fine, and it's a decorative image. And that's okay, to make it something that they're not just looking at text over and over and over and over again. And that's fine. But I really try to get them to think about the pedagogy of what they're doing, how they're doing it, sort of why they're doing it. Why is this image here? So we talked about, just our second recap, we talked about font styles in the first half. Talked about color contrast. We talked about don't convey information with color alone. The second part, we talked about structuring documents with headings. We talked about hyperlinks, that they should be meaningful, they should mean something. And then we talked about making images available, about those long descriptions and that alt text and the context of alt text. How does it?
Darren, did we lose you? Darren? Bridget, this is Dolores. Can you hear me talking?
Yes, I can hear you, but I lost Darren also.
Okay, okay. So everyone please stand by. Let me check to see as to why we can't hear Darren anymore. Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah, no problem.
Perfect. Okay, so he asked that we stand by. Okay. Yeah, I know early on, let's I'm gonna stop, I'm gonna pause the recording.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, let's just recap. We talked about accessible fonts, that style and color. Make sure you always have good color contrast. If you want to convey information, don't use color alone to convey information. Give them some sort of other formatting tool. We talked about document structure, with headings and lists. We talked about those. We talked about making hyperlinks meaningful, right? That should mean something. Why am I clicking on this site? Why am I going there? And again, I'd like to emphasize, which I always do with my class, a lot of what we're talking about is pedagogy. It's effective teaching, right? At any time, any student in my class, I should be able to ask, what are you supposed to be doing? Now, remember, I'm not asking them, do they understand it? Do they like doing it? I'm asking them, what are you supposed to be doing? And if I'm not clear enough as an instructor, they can't answer that question. They should always be able to answer that question. So when we talk about meaningful hyperlinks, when we talk about alt text and image descriptions, we talk about those structures, we're really talking about making this class understandable for everyone. So the next thing we're going to talk about is accessible tables. A web-ready file name means just not over 32 characters for a file name. Okay, and then we'll talk about one of the things I don't really like to talk about, but we're going to talk about anyway, is the accessibility checker. And I'll tell you why I don't really like to talk about it a little bit later. So for accessible tables, I'm just going to talk to you about what you should avoid when creating a table. We're going to talk about creating a table using Word's table tool. We'll talk about header rows. We'll talk about a caption. That's what they call titles for a table. We'll talk about alternative text for a table. And then we'll just, we'll perform a basic accessibility test for a table. So these are some sample accessible tables. Now, one of the things I do in my job, or I've always prided myself on doing, is when I don't know something, which that's all the time, I go on my Google machine, I find somebody who should know it, and then I just call them and ask them, right? So anytime I don't know something, or which is a lot more frequent than I would like to admit, but when I don't, what I do is I just go to Google, I'll look up somebody who should know, and then I'll just call their number and I'll just ask them. And it's interesting, people really want to tell you what they know, particularly experts. I mean, they're thirsty for somebody to call them and ask them about something that they're an expert in. And sometimes they'll talk to you too long, right? Sometimes you're like, okay, all right, I got it. You answered my question. So anytime like I said, I don't know something. So when I first started, I was very confused about tables and accessibility. So what I did was I went on the internet, I looked up Microsoft's accessibility team, and then I called the head of their accessibility team and just said, can I'm calling from North Carolina. And there's a 3-hour time difference. So I called them at 10, which would be 1 o'clock in Seattle, Redmond, Washington area. And I talked to a nice young lady at the time. The head of their accessibility team was a nice young lady from Iowa, from Ames, Iowa. So I was talking to her about tables, and she works at Microsoft. She's kind of a genius. And she asked me a question. She said, Darren, do you have a hammer at your house? I was like, huh? Yeah, I got a hammer at my house. Most people have a hammer. She said, you don't use a hammer to screw screws in with, do you? I went, no, that's ridiculous. That's not what the tool is. Then I went, oh, okay, I get the metaphor. So what she was basically saying was, in sort of her abstract genius way, was tables are very simple tools. They're for columns and rows of data. That's all they're there for, right? They're to put data in columns and rows. And then she was talking, and I ended up having sort of a philosophical discussion with her. She said, and by data, I don't mean necessarily numbers. She said, I just mean text and data in columns and rows. That's all tables are for. She said, that's it. That's the only reason we have tables. She said, a lot of times people use tables to do formatting. They want to create columns. They want to, merge and split cells, which is not what they were for. And then her argument that she kept coming back to was, that's like trying to use a hammer to screw screws in with. It's not the correct tool. And her argument also was that tables are they're a very simple tool. They're the hammers of Word. Okay. So these sample accessible tables, you see it. I've just got, the first one is just average hours of television viewed per day. And it's, weeks 1, 2, and 3, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And it just shows you the average hours. The second table is reading assignment and homework assignment and what week they're going to be in. And again, a very, very sort of simple tool. Don't use a table to create document columns. You have a columns command. You can easily create columns if you want to. You don't need to use a table to do that. That's using the wrong tool for the job. So if you want to add columns, you just go to layout and columns, and you add as many columns as you want. Or however, well, not as many as you want, but however you want to add columns. So in Word, don't use a table to add columns. Don't use tables for formatting tools, because that's not what they're there for. So just layout and columns, and then you can add the columns that you want. And avoid merging or splitting table cells, because tables are going to be read left to right, top to bottom. And that's just sort of how they're read. And we'll see an example of tables in just a little bit. Don't nest tables. Again, tables are only for columns and rows of data. And when you check table properties, create a header row. I'll tell you why. Has somebody ever given you like some stapled up papers, and they've handed them to you, and you're flipping through the pages and you're reading, and there's a table, and you got to keep flipping back and forth to get to the table, to see what's on the table, to see the headers, or to see what this column means or that column means? That's because they haven't set a header row. And that's really a usability feature, not necessarily an accessibility feature. I'd argue that's more of That's more usability rather than accessibility. So you want to make sure that when you do your table properties, you have repeat as header row at the top of each page. And where it says allow row to break across pages, just trust me on this. Make sure that is unchecked. Make sure that that is unchecked. So that's basically tables. Tables must include alt text and a header row. And I'll show you this in just a second. Don't use tables as a formatting tool. If you want to use columns, just add columns. Don't merge or split table cells. And accessible Word is really about creating a structured document that all readers can benefit from. So I'm going to stop sharing here to see if there's any questions. And then I'm going to show you this in sort of practice rather than just me talking. Okay, I'm going to show you this in real practice, what this looks like. Are there any questions on anything we've done as far as anything we've gone over, anything that wasn't clear or wasn't as clear as it could have been? Any questions at all? Just type those in the chat window if you have one, and we will get to that when we can.
And Darren, I do not see anything in the chat, but I will continue to check.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you one of the great things you can do with headings and why headings are something you might want to consider using in your documents. So I'm going to share again in just a second here. Let me share my screen here. All right, so you should be able to see this proposal draft now. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this proposal draft here is, like I said, I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to go to Navigation Pane.
So Darren, I'm not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, that was me. I didn't hit the share button. Okay, so I'm going to go to, so this is the document I have here, and I'm just going to go to View, and I'm going to click on Navigation Pane. So I wanted to talk to you about how and why we, and by we I mean me, but we designed this document with headings, or I should say we. It wasn't we. It wasn't me by myself. So let's say that this is a long document. You can see down here it's 68 pages and it's 17,927 words. So here's why I have the headings. Again, I'm not thinking about people with disabilities right now. Let's say that that this is a draft, and let's say that somebody, say we want to change the QEP co-director, okay? So I can open up the headings, I click on QEP co-director, and I could put a person's name in there. I could expand the responsibilities. You see how I was able to navigate from page 0 basically to page 46 just by using the navigation pane. So I would argue that any document that you're going to have to do a lot of editing to, even my syllabus is done with headings, right? Because the only thing that really changes from semester to semester is my office hours. So if my office hours change or the book changes, I just open up the navigation pane and I click and go there and just type that change. And that saves me a couple seconds, right? But if every time I'm using the computer, I'm saving 2, 3, 4 seconds, right? 8, 9, 10 seconds, that's a lot of time. So that's the reason that we put those headings in there. just to make it easier to navigate. It just becomes easier to edit, easier to navigate. So if I type in results here and I just type in the word, again, I was typing the word student, and it'll tell me that it's 417 examples of the word student here. And then it'll highlight everywhere there's the word student. And then I can just click to it and go there if I wanted to do something with the word student. Can't imagine why I would want to do something with the word student, but I did want to show you that example of just how this navigation pane lets you navigate through this document. So if you need to edit or revise something, it's in your best interest to do those headings. Now let's talk about, I'm gonna start a new document here. And it's 11 o'clock and I'm kind of hungry. So I'm gonna talk about tacos a little bit, okay? I know this is a ridiculous subject, but I want you to see, how headings work, what we can do with them. So I'm gonna go to view and I'm gonna go to navigation pane here. And as you can see, there's nothing there. I'm gonna type tacos. I'm gonna type chicken, beef, fish, pork, and I'll type innards. Okay, so I want to create some headings. I want to create some structure to this tacos document. Yes, this is a ridiculous document. I understand that. So I'm going to put tacos. I'm going to make that, I'm going to go home and I'm going to make that a bold. You see, it's not showing up here, right? Because it's not a heading, because I didn't use styles. So this is about tacos. So I want to make tacos my heading 1. So I'm going to click heading 1 here. It's tacos. And then I'm going to go here for chicken, beef, fish, pork, and innards. Now you can see now for headings, I've got one heading, which is tacos. That's my heading 1. I'm going to make these other ones heading 2s. Oops, I did not highlight innards there. There we go. So now those are heading 2s. Now let's say I don't, you know what? I really don't like the way this heading 1 looks. I don't like that color. I don't like that font. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to heading 1. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go to where it says modify. So this is heading 1. Now I want to point out something. If I click new documents based on this template, everybody who uses this computer after me, their heading 1 is going to look exactly the way I tell it to look right now. Okay. But I'm not using my personal computer now, right? I'm in a lab, so I don't want to do that. I only want to do it in this document. I point that out so that you'll see that new document based on this template. Again, this is that sort of automation process we're talking about. If you have a style guide in your department or a way that you personally create documents and you want them to look a certain way, you can set that all up using styles. So if you click new document based on this template, everybody who uses this computer after me, unless they change it, right? They have the power to change it as well. Their heading 1 would look exactly like I tell it to look. So I don't like this font. So I want to do it in Arial black. And I don't like that color. So I want to do this darker kind of blue color. I like that color. So I'm going to click OK. Now, same for heading 2s here. I'm going to go down to my heading 2s. I have 5 heading 2s. Wouldn't matter if I had 50 or 500. When I go to modify my heading 2s, again, I want that slightly darker blue color. I want those to be Arial black. And I want them to be 12-point font. So I click OK, and it changes all of my heading 2s. So it automates that process for me. So if I start adding different kinds of chicken tacos, I can, click on chicken, fish, it'll take me right to that section. I click, you saw as I clicked, let me do that again. Let me undo that and just show you something. So chicken's a heading 2, right? As soon as I hit the enter button, you see on the styles pane, it changes back to normal. So now it's a normal, it's just a normal font. Let's say I don't want to talk about innards here, right? I want those to be a heading 3. So I right click on it in the navigation pane, I go to Demote, and you see when it sort of is indented under here, this is the child, this is the parent. So this is a 2 and this is a 3, just like you can say this is a 1 and all these are 2s. So I can right click on it, I can go to promote or demote. So I demoted it, now it's a heading 4. I'm going to promote this back to a heading 2.
So Darren.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, so there is a question in the chat as
Okay.
you were covering, as you're covering the headings about the font color of blue. Is there a particular reason as to why they are automatically blue?
Yes, I asked that question. And the woman I was talking to you about from Ames, Iowa, she said, I'm about to give you the worst answer you can give anybody for anything. I said, wow, because I'd asked the same question. Why is it default blue? I said, the worst answer? She said, yeah. I said, well, what is it? She said, that's the way we've always done it. So they don't want to go back in and recode that because it would take, I guess, a lot of time. So it defaulted blue in the early days and they never went back and changed it. So
Okay.
that was the only reason. It was just a holdover from how they used to do things.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And good question. I had the same one. I was just curious. And like I said, it's amazing when you don't know something and you call somebody who does. They'll usually talk to you. So those are just a couple of ways you could do some headings. And now let's talk about tables. Now, if you listen to nothing I said today, okay, please listen to this. When it comes to insert, table, never do this. Please, I beg you. Always pick a number of columns and rows. The reasons you should never draw a table, well, I'll show you in a minute. So I'm gonna do 3 columns and 3 rows of books, and we're gonna talk about tables a little bit. So I'm gonna do title, author, genre, okay? And I'm gonna talk, that's not how you spell genre, but we're gonna talk about books, right? So I'm gonna do Dune, that's by Frank Herbert, and that's science fiction. The Madness of Crowds is by Louise Penny, and that's a mystery. Now, let's say I want to add some columns and rows after this. I just tab, right? I tab and that'll add columns and rows. I wanted you to see that. Let's see. Let me fill this in. I tab and read these. Okay, so I want you to see that tables are simple tools. So the first test you can do for the accessibility of a table is just a tab test. So I tab, it's going to go from left to right, top to bottom. Now, these are just a few of my favorite books. This, let's say, I mean, I could fill in hundreds here, right? I could fill in 50 Robert B. Parker books, right? When I was a kid, we didn't have a TV, so to entertain myself, I had to read. So let's say this goes on, I could make this go on for hundreds and hundreds of books, but I want title, author, and genre to go everywhere this list goes, right? So when this goes to another page, I don't want to hand this to you And then you have to flip back and forth to see title, author, and genre. I want title, author, and genre to go everywhere this table goes. So I'm just going to make this my header row. So as you can see, I'm going to right click. I'm going to go down here to where it says table properties. Remember, I told you, I said, don't unclick allow row to break across pages. Now I'm in Office 365 now, so I don't really have to do this anymore. As you can see up here, it says header row, first column. So that's already set. I'm good to go. I'm going to do alt text for this table and just type in list of books. So there you go. Now let's say I want to add a title to this table. I'm going to go to insert caption, and it's always going to say table 1. Like right now, I cannot backspace and get rid of table 1, and that's fine. I may want to have these numbered as table 1, table 2, table 3. I don't want to do that in this case, but that's okay. So I went to insert caption. A caption is what Word calls a table title. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I can put it either above the table or below the table. I don't want to do it below the table, so I'm going to do it above the table. And then I'm just going to call it my favorite books. And then I click OK. And there we have it. Now I can get rid of table 1. Oops, let me undo that. I went one step too far. Okay, now I can change this font, do whatever I need to with it. You know, I like Arial black, so I'll make that Arial black. I'll get rid of the italics, and I'll make it a little bit bigger. And there you go. Now, title, author, and genre will go everywhere this table goes. And you want that. That's just a usability feature. That's a sort of accessibility feature. So I did want to show you those headings, how you would use those, how they help you navigate through a document. And again, I'm going to encourage you, maybe even expand the styles pane, right? And look at it, figure out what all this stuff does, how you want to use it, make it bigger. I sometimes, or all the time really, this is my workflow, I expand this styles pane. You have options down here. And again, I just recommend you go through these. When I type new document based on this template, any kind of styles that I set here will automatically update. That's why I talk to you a lot about the structure and sort of automating that process of creating Word documents. When you understand these sort of built-in features, what happens is, again, you're going to end up creating an accessible Word document as a side effect. It's just the way that works. Again, I'm not going to set any new documents based on this template because I'm in a lab now. It's not my computer. But you can set up how you want all your documents to look so they look exactly the same. How it'll be a lot easier for you and quicker and easier for you to create documents. Side effect of that is you end up with accessible documents. If you want some, hands-on in a computer lab training, contact me. We didn't have time to go through every iteration of Word accessibility here. But what I really wanted to do was let you see that structure, that accessibility and structure are two sides of the same coin, that you benefit just as much from that structure as someone with a disability. But if you want that hands-on, we get in there and do it. Just kind of email me, and we can set up some training for you or your faculty or your staff or your college. And the good thing is, once you learn Word accessibility, you basically have learned PowerPoint and Excel. Now, things are they're gonna be called different things. In PowerPoint, slide titles act exactly like headings. They act almost the exact same way. Things will be different, right, in Excel and PowerPoint. The concepts are going to be the same. You're going to need alt text. You're going to need structure. You're going to need header rows. Right? You're going to have those accessible tables. You're going to need those long descriptions. But essentially, so I teach everything from Word accessibility to web accessibility to math accessibility. But I always start with Word because those concepts apply to all of it, right? Once you get Word accessibility, you've essentially, again, you'll still probably need a little bit of training, but if you really grasp the concepts of Word accessibility, then you've grasped the concepts of PowerPoint and Excel accessibility. So that's why we generally start with Word, and that's how we do it. And you'll get much more of a deep dive into styles and how to use those to, like I said, automate and make your document creation a lot easier. And particularly if you have a style guide for a department, then yeah, you want to be using those style guides. You want to have those templates to create documents, just because it's just a lot easier. So that concludes our presentation for today. I thank you for coming and spending some time with me here today. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Anything else you'd like to see or anything that wasn't clear, just kind of let me know. I never took a mind reading class, so unless you ask questions, I think you got it.
Okay, so as Darren has said, if you have any questions about what he was demonstrating or emphasizing in using Word and how you are addressing, as he said, two sides, the structure piece as well as accessibility when you're thinking about your readers of your documents or whoever is accessing your documents, this would be a good time to ask any questions or to get some points of clarity of any of the information that was presented. So you can either unmute yourself and ask the question or put the question in the chat, and I am monitoring the chat.
I'm gonna stop sharing. I'll put my email in if the question comes up, say tomorrow.
Okay.
Actually, I'll be at a math conference tomorrow, but anyway, I'll be checking my email.
Thank you for doing that. Okay.
Yeah, so if you have a question or something comes up, or you have an accessibility question, say next week, the week after that, whenever, just email me. Nobody in this state can say they've emailed me and they haven't gotten an answer in 48 hours.
Wow.
They can say they didn't like the answer. That might be true, right? But not that they didn't get one. So if there's no questions,
Let's see. I will check. So we do have one in the chat. Well, so just a response saying thank you, and thank you was very helpful. And so as we wrap up here, and as I wait for questions to come up, just in case, I will continue to monitor the chat. But what I will say to you, Darren, is thank you very much for sharing today's content, because it is important to make sure that we're taking care of all of the persons who may access our documents, who may read our documents, and we want the documents to be friendly for the different users. So thank you so much for giving us some tips on how we can take care of structure at the same time taking care of accessibility. So I have put the link in the chat for feedback so that we can continue to bring workshops that will be a benefit to you as you're looking at equity, guided pathways, basic needs of your students, and teaching and learning. So do access the link that says assessment. And Darren, I like what you said about making sure that that link doesn't just have the word here, but it tells the participants or the responders where they're going. So I definitely have tried to be mindful of that, and you will see with the link that it shows that. So anyway, well, thank you all so much for your time, for sharing your time with us this morning. And Darren, I will stay on this for a couple more minutes in case someone else comes and someone else wants to ask you a question.
Sure. Yeah, I'll stay with you too. And thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And then there are a couple of comments as I'm seeing here where it says this is a person's third workshop and have found all three be very helpful, which we appreciate, and great information. Practice important to get this right. Yes, I agree. You got to practice it to constantly have that progression of improvement as we look at the accessibility through documents and what the messages we're conveying in our documents.
Yeah, practice is important for everything.
Yes, so thank you. And I'll go ahead and stop recording.